Hi, everybody. This is Beth Osborne, Director of Transportation for America. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today about our new Repair Priorities Report. I'm really excited to be joined on the webinar today by Steve Ellis with Taxpayers for Common Sense, Jack Moran with the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and with Dick Hall, a Commissioner for the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Just to warn folks, we will have time for your questions towards the end. We're going to go through our presentations first. If you want your question to be considered, just type it into the chat box. We're going to be following the questions you all ask, and our Communications Director, Steve Davis, is sitting here to monitor that chat box and make sure that your questions are heard. If you have any technical problems and you're having trouble hearing, also please chat that into us, let us know, and we will be sure to address it as fast as we can. So as I said, I'm Beth Osborne. I'm the relatively new Director of Transportation for America. We are a national nonprofit that is focused on creating a transportation system that connects people of all means and abilities to jobs and opportunity by multiple modes of travel. We hope that this can be done with very little impact to communities and the environment. And we do our work through reports like this one, research and analysis, through advocacy, both at the federal, state, and local level, and through direct technical assistance to practitioners. The Repair Priorities Report itself is actually the third iteration of this report, which we began back in 2011. So this time we not only talk about the state of repair, but also the trend that we have seen over the last 8 to 10 years and whether or not it is heading in the direction we wish for it to. We use the Federal Highways Statistics Series, which we have a link to in the webinar for those that want to go dig through it yourselves. There's rich information in there, and it is parsed out on an annual basis, though frustratingly there are some limitations to the data. We'll talk a little bit more detail about this as I go on, but you'll notice that the latest data is not terribly recent, and there are some pieces of information. For example, we'd love to know more about how many lane miles of highways there are, but most of the reporting is center line miles, which means it's hard to tell the difference between a 2-lane road and an 8-lane road, and we think that there's some limitations due to that style of reporting. So moving on, I think this is the crux of the message we want people to hear, and that is that the overall condition of our roadways is not going in the right direction nationally. There are places where it is going in the right direction, but on a national basis, the roads are in worse condition today than they were 10 years ago, and that is in spite of a windfall of spending through the Recovery Act about 10 years ago. That funding was supposed to come into the program to rebuild our crumbling roads and bridges, but it doesn't appear that is necessarily what it did. If all the money was being spent on repair and we were still seeing a bad trend, you could make the argument that this is a lack of funding issue. What we wish to point out is we are finding a good amount of money for expansion across the country. This is due to the fact that, at least at the federal level, clear priorities have not been set in the program. And what we're doing is we're giving too little money to do everything, but still insisting that DOTs do everything, and they're doing a little bit of everything, but we're not able to have a focused effort in any one priority, including this very fundamental one of repair. So moving on, this shows the states that have seen their roadway conditions worsen over the last 10 years or so. And there's a little bit that's misleading about this that I want to point out. One is some of the states that didn't see their conditions get worse didn't see it get worse because their conditions were pretty bad to begin with. And so they were bad 10 years ago and they're pretty bad now. But they're about the same bad. And there's also also some states that show red where their conditions have deteriorated, but they might have gone from 8% roads in poor condition to 11%, which is substantially better than the national average. So it's worth digging through and looking at the details of your state's performance. It's important to know what their trend is. It's important to know what their spending has been. You will notice in some cases that states might be performing poorly, but they're putting all of their money now into repair. So they've learned the lesson and they are trying to rectify it. Whereas in other cases, they're going in the wrong direction and they're not spending their money to change it. All right, so moving on, we wanted to put the cost to repair the existing system in some perspective. So we've used some estimates that FHWA puts together on the cost to rehabilitate roads in poor condition, to maintain roads in fair condition, or to bring them up to good condition. And basically what we found is it would cost $169 billion per year just to keep our existing public roads in good condition, and $62 billion per year to address the backlog of poor roads. That is a lot of money, and it's a lot of money compared to what we spend on all highway capital today, which is what the gray road shows you. So even just getting to the level that we need to maintain the roads we've already built is a big lift, much less to go beyond that to take care of priorities other than just repair. And while we love to talk about roads as an asset, which they clearly are, we couldn't have a functioning economy without them, we also need to recognize that they are liabilities. And as soon as they are built, there are operational and maintenance costs that come with them. And we have attempted to estimate what just the additional lane miles that over the time period being studied here is going to cost. So we spent the last 10 years saying we desperately need money to rebuild our crumbling roads and bridges, while at the same time adding an additional $5 billion burden to that need to repair crumbling roads and bridges. And we need to get our arms around this before we put more money into the program. We also looked at the extent to which money is being spent on repair versus expansion. So there's some good news in this report, and that is, since we started studying this, there has been a move towards more funding for repair. Unfortunately, we're coming from a bit of a difficult place where we were putting substantially more into road expansion than into repair, and now we've reached a point where it's about equal. As we talk about infrastructure bills and reauthorization, it's the right time to discuss what is the right proportion here, especially considering what we're willing to spend in the program. Now, it also is useful, I think, to point out that federal highways doesn't classify things as repair versus expansion like this. What we did was go through the various expenses and categorize them ourselves. So we looked through the way states were spending money, and those things that were categorized as right-of-way purchase, new construction, reconstruction with added capacity, and major widenings as an expansion project. If it was classified as reconstruction but not adding capacity, restoration and rehabilitation, resurfacing, or even a minor widening, we counted that as repair. There would have been a good justification for putting minor widening in expansion, but we didn't think that was quite appropriate. A turn lane might add a little capacity, but it's not really a roadway expansion, even though it does bring in additional cost. That was a bit of a judgment call on our part, but we decided to go a little bit more on the conservative side. There's also, I should point out, an other highway expenditures category, which we didn't put in this graph, but you will see in the tables that are in our appendix. And that category includes a pretty wide range of spending, including engineering, bridge repair, and expansion. So there's both expansion and repair that's included in that other category because we have pushed bridge to the side. We felt like other organizations were handling the bridge issue, and we really wanted this to be more focused on pavement. So just a couple of minutes to talk about the level of expansion. There's been over 223,000 lane miles of roadway added across the country in the time period studied here, that's enough to drive across the country 83 times. And as we point out before, that's a $5 billion maintenance bill added on top of what we already had. $5 billion is a substantial amount of money. That is the total amount of money that goes out to Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, and Arkansas, just for the new lane miles added over the last 10 or so years. So that is, in terms of the overall program, a substantial chunk of money. Another issue we wanted to look into was whether urban roads or rural roads were performing better in terms of repair. This is a really difficult and interesting issue. Rural areas have a lot more lane miles of roadway because it covers a lot more space than urban areas. Urban areas have a lot more people in them, which causes a lot more wear and tear on the roads that do exist. There's a lot of things going on here, but I was frankly quite surprised to find out we're spending about an equivalent amount in urban and rural America. It's a pretty balanced portfolio in terms of spending. In terms of performance, it is not balanced. The rural roads are in better condition overall than the urban roads are. My best guess for why that is the case is because urban areas are very hard areas to do construction in. It's highly disruptive. They tend to be very congested roadways, and so you hear a lot of screaming when you come in to do even just a basic repaving and cut off some of the corridor to travel. I think doing construction in those areas is more expensive. So it's expensive, it's complicated, and a lot of those roads are not owned by the state. And understandably, the state, which is the controller of all the money, often focuses on the roads they own first, which is a completely reasonable position to take. But the outcome is urban roads are not looking very good performance-wise. So what will it take to address this? And some of our speakers are going to talk about this because we have two representatives of DOTs who are from different areas of the country and have certainly different circumstances, but they have a lot of lessons to share about what it takes to really focus your program on repair. It sounds like a simple thing to do, but it is not the easiest thing to do. We're making a policy and a political argument here. The policy argument is it's responsible to take care of what we built before you build new stuff. But the political argument is it might be good to talk to the public about what we guarantee we will do for them if we ask for more money. Right now, the history of the program is to talk about flexibility of spending for those getting the money. But we're going hand in hand to the public and asking them for their cash. So we might need to start with what we're going to give them and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable for delivering that promise to them. And when it comes to pavement condition, we have about 20% of our roads in poor condition. As we're going into the next authorization and talking about pumping additional funding into the program, what is a fair amount to commit to the public that we will fix? If we promise that we'll get that number down to 10% of roads in poor condition, is that sufficient? Should we guarantee 5%? Does it depend on how much money we ask for? These are the conversations that my organization would like to see us have. Not to say that we shouldn't talk about money, but we should only talk about money with accountability and a commitment to the American people that we will deliver a better product in the end. So some of the ways we believe that could be effectively done is to set a target to guarantee measurable outcomes for American taxpayers. So what is our target of the next 6 years? To get to 15%, 10%? Is 12% enough? Let's set a target and let's orient the program around it. Let's require that states repair their existing systems before expanding. So first, we'll take care of what we have, and then if there's money left over, we can go bigger. We might even set up a program that's more designed and structured that way. So for example, in the transit program, there's a formula grant program that is there for basic maintenance and repair. You can do some minor improvements. But if you want to do something big, you come to the federal government and you make 3 guarantees. One is that your project meets certain federal priorities. in terms of the benefits it will bring society. 2 is that you have a plan to operate and maintain that asset. And 3, that you have a plan to operate and maintain that asset without seeing the rest of your system degrade. And that might be a good model to bring into highways as well, especially if in return for more money for the program. And last of all, we want to track progress and require better data. FHWA's data that we use to do this report, particularly on the spending, is 5 years out of date. 5 years is longer than any state transportation improvement plan. 5 years ago, the majority of the governors in office now were different. 5 years ago, we were under a totally different reauthorization than we are now. So we're coming to the end of a 6-year reauthorization cycle with no information about spending in the last authorization cycle without reaching out directly to DOTs one by one. In fact, when we published this report, one thing we found out, and the reason Mississippi's on the call, is there was a great story to be told about Mississippi's accomplishments over the last 5 years that was missing in the data. And my guess is there's probably some other states that have a better story to tell than the data show as well. There's probably also a couple stories about states that have gone in the wrong direction, but we don't know. And that's not accessible with public dollars. I would have frankly expected Congress as the oversight body to ask for this sometime over the last 5 years. I certainly call on them to consider in their oversight role for better data from FHWA, but frankly the administration should be on top of it without being asked. So those are our recommendations, and I'm going to turn things over here from Steve Ellis with Taxpayers for Common Sense, who is our partners on this report, to talk about why they're involved in this and why they believe that this is important. Before I do want to remind everyone, if you have questions, to type it into the chat box as we're going, and we will read them off at the end. In the meantime, Steve, you're up.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks Transportation for America for partnering with us in this and bringing us into this project. Sorry, no slides for me, so you'll be graced with my ugly mug for the entire time I'm talking, which I promise won't be too long. Taxpayers for Common Sense, we're a national nonpartisan budget watchdog. We've been around for nearly 25 years. I've been with the organization for 20 of those years. We have a long history on infrastructure investments and transportation projects. We've done reports called Road to Ruin, dealing with wasteful road projects, partnering with local partners on those issues. We also, this is our 3rd time partnering with Transportation for America, Smart Growth America on repair priorities. As Beth mentioned, there was a 2014 report and the first one in 2011. Now, you might wonder why we're involved. We're a budget watchdog. Well, obviously, as Beth has mentioned, there's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot of investments going out there. We just did a recent report, Smart Strategies for Infrastructure, and we made several policy recommendations. Remove what doesn't work, fix it first, prioritize spending, the user pays principle, and rebuild better and smarter. Well, you may note that repair priorities hits at least 2 of these directly, which is fix it first and prioritize spending. And as Beth noted earlier, fix it first certainly has not been the priority. That the roads in poor condition have actually increased, and the roads in good condition have barely budged, moved up a little bit, but not much from the last time we were looking at these projects, or even from a little bit further back. And as a nation, we need to prioritize our spending better. And because, as a budget watchdog, we're not opposed to spending per se. We just want to see it spent wisely and appropriately. And right now we can't say either about our road spending. Yet, and Beth alluded to this as well, that even at our current level of spending, there are calls for more. We're in the midst of Infrastructure Week yet again. We like to say here that it seems like it's Infrastructure Week somewhere every week, and that we're hearing these calls for $2 trillion in infrastructure investments. We're hearing calls to increase the federal gas tax, which has been frozen in time since the early 1990s, or to create a vehicle miles traveled tax to pay for this. But in reality, nobody is telling us, for particularly when they're arguing for the $2 trillion, what's the there? What's the substance? What are we actually going to get? What, where, and when, and why? With those resources, they're just asking for the cash, and then they're going to fill in the blanks later. And so, I talked about the gas taxes. Well, remember our Smart Strategies principles, user pays. So we're all for that because over the last decade, roughly $150 billion has been transferred from the general fund to bolster the Highway Trust Fund. But before you can ask for more spending, you have to be able to say what you're going to do with it and set those achievable targets that we outlined in repair priorities. We didn't even specifically say exactly what they had to be, the specific percentage, but let's come to a common agreement, something that can be achievable, and then measure that success. And that gets to Beth's point about the fact that we haven't had the FHWA data that we were working with went all the way back. Was the most recent data was 2014, which is just unacceptable because the data is there, it just isn't being made to the public. I'm reminded of the axiom, in God we trust, but everyone else bring data. And we certainly don't have that in this case. And so I'd like to kind of close it and turn it over to our state-based colleagues from Massachusetts and Mississippi that, that lawmakers and officials like a good ribbon cutting at a new road, but repair is often treated like flossing teeth. A tedious, sometimes painful extra step that's all too easily skipped, except that it is critical and it saves taxpayers cash and pain down the road. And so we're really happy to have joined in this report. It's important to have these updates and to look at this, but we want to see change. I mean, we're not just in this to bang our heads against the wall. We want to see positive change in this direction, and we think it's possible, particularly when there's a push to try to get more resources into this area, both roads and other infrastructure. We need to see the data and the argument and the justification. Taxpayers need to see that before they're going to open their wallets for a gas tax increase or a vehicle mileage travel tax or other offsets to pay for this infrastructure. I'll just leave it because I am a budget guy. Right now, we're facing deficits, federal budget deficits, that have not been seen since right after the Great Recession, and before that, not since right after World War II. Our national debt is actually at the same levels as it was in 1946, right after World War II, and not seen since then. And so it is critical that every dime be spent wisely and appropriately, and that offsets be found or other ways to pay for the infrastructure and not just throw more good money after bad. With that, I'll turn it back to Beth at Transportation for America, and thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, and we really value the partnership with Taxpayers for Common Sense. I'm really glad to have them involved. I really I appreciate that flossing reference because I think that is the issue. It seems like this is something that is so common sense, but it's not the easiest thing to do and to commit to. So we're going to turn now to our practitioners who actually have to deal with where the rubber meets the road to organize a program around repair and what that really takes. First up, we're going to have Jack Moran with the Massachusetts DOT talk, and I just want to say Massachusetts had a longer-term commitment since some of their bigger, more ambitious project days to repair and extracting great value out of existing infrastructure. So I'm going to turn things over now to Jack to talk about their program.
Thank you, Beth. Good afternoon, everyone. You can advance to the next slide. My name again is Jack Moran. I'm Deputy Chief of Performance and Asset Management at the Highway Division here in Massachusetts at MassDOT. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to share with the group today on behalf of my colleagues background on our agency and specifically some of its decision-making processes. So the Highway Division, a little bit north of a $1 billion construction program on an annual basis. We manage 5,100 bridges, 3,500 of which are our own, so we also have maintenance responsibility for. 9,500 lane miles of pavement, with just under a third of that being on the interstate side. Some other notable pieces of infrastructure that we manage are the group of assets known around here as the Metropolitan Highway System. So that's the regional system within Greater Boston that includes some of the legacy infrastructure, the Sumner and Callahan tunnels, and the Tobin Bridge, as well as the central artery structures that were built what's known as the Big Dig. So let's advance the next slide. So this chart on here is pretty well known within the borders of Massachusetts and dates back to about 2008. At that point in time, we had realized that our bridge condition was certainly not headed in the direction that we wanted to be, and in terms of structural deficiency, we were forecasting some pretty scary outcomes if we didn't kind of bend the curve, as it were. So that this information here, as well as a lot of advocacy and hard work from people within my building and elsewhere, developed a what is known as the Accelerated Bridge Program, which was an 8-year program that specifically targeted the replacement and rehabilitation of structurally deficient bridges, along with maintenance and preservation actions to forestall further deterioration. So I bring this up because this is really, I'm an asset management guy. I've worked my way up to the agency, and really this is kind of the 101 of how to really identify a need and then come up with a plan and hold yourself accountable to it. And I think this is a great example. I was lucky enough to come in on the tail end on some of the construction projects with this program, and it was a great success. And it was successful because we were able to articulate exactly what the outcome was that we were attempting to get to, and I think we did so. We did deliver upon that outcome through collaboration with stakeholders, our contractors, engineering partners, and some aggressive construction techniques, as well as creative project delivery. So next slide. The following with that, in the ABP program is just about done at the moment, after completing some large signature projects around the city, including the Longfellow Bridge. Some of you who've been in the city may have come across that on our red line. But follow on, fast forward to about 2015, and under current Massachusetts Governor Baker and our Secretary of Transportation, Stephanie Pollock, kind of wiped the slate clean on the capital investment side of the house and really started from a blank canvas on building up a methodology in which we would be deciding how we were going to spend all of our transportation dollars. And this is coming with, Mass Highway became MassDOT, so we were bringing a lot of people under one umbrella here, and it was a very challenging planning exercise to really organize how it is that we want to spend our money. And the three guiding principles are what you see on the screen here, and they should be familiar to this conversation. So we've number one being reliability, 2 modernization, and 3 expansion. So of course there is somewhat of a great line between reliability and modernization in some cases, but in most cases those 2 priorities are dealing with existing assets primarily. Go to the next slide, please. So with those priorities established, the next important thing was to really articulate within each one of those priorities how we wanted to spend our money, or what the sizes of the priorities should be, the programs within each priority. So my office here in the Highway Division, working for the Chief Engineer, really focused on understanding our asset condition, and this was at the state level, kicked off in right around the time of MAP 21, but it has gone in parallel with the federal level asset management process, and we've had the opportunity to focus on it because we've had support from our management and our leadership to really build up the systems. I know we were talking about data earlier. We are extremely focused on data, both in terms of asset condition, but also expenditures, where it's being spent, how it's being spent. All this information needed really a home in our state legislature that established a requirement that we report to a Performance Asset Management Advisory Council. And this was a very, I think, a positive benefit for us to have a venue to be able to report this information at the state level. So on an annual basis, we would publish this report that would have asset information and some amount of financial information that's related to strictly the physical assets of the infrastructure. That information would then be made available to both the legislature, but also available for us in our capital planning process. If you go to the next slide, please. So we're currently in the midst of our 20 through 24 planning cycle, but this was just a quick screenshot from our 19 through 23 plan. We have a 5-year rolling capital investment plan. And as you can see here, these are the splits basically across the organization. So we certainly are making a big investment in reliability. And as I said, there is somewhat of a gray line between reliability and modernization. So, it's fair to say that the majority is to state of good repair type activities, but I don't think it's necessarily a binary decision, but having the information in going back to the chart before with the Accelerated Bridge Program, just being able to articulate what the future might look like in different investment scenarios helps make these decisions to be made in a much more clear-eyed manner. Go to the next slide. So once the CIP's been built and we translate these investments into projects and the projects get notice to proceed and the work gets done out in the field and that translates to inspections and condition changes and the like, we would expect to see the outcomes of these investments. And with the creation of MassDOT, we have a very smart group of individuals in the Office of Performance Management and Innovation who, on an annual basis, collect information from each one of the individual divisions at MassDOT and report it out. This year we went to a web version of the report, and for all the world to see, you can see the outcomes of our investments for the past state fiscal year and beyond. So I think we really have a pretty good closed-loop system now that helps us, really truly embrace that data-driven approach that I think that we want to get to, and I think people expect us to be at. And the next slide. And that's it. This is actually a photo from one of our signature projects from the Accelerated Bridge Program, where we replaced a series of bridges on an interstate and an urban environment. Great example of really just tackling an existing problem. We've mentioned doing work in an urban environment, and that certainly is a challenge. And it will continue to be a challenge. The infrastructure was built in many cases 50, 60 years ago, so it's challenges like this that we can face, and if given the opportunity. Thanks for the time here. I guess we'll wait till the end for any questions. Beth?
Thank you so much. We're now going to hear from Commissioner Dick Hall of Mississippi DOT, who's going to talk about their shift in the program. You'll notice in our report that in the latest year of data we have that Mississippi was putting a lot of money into expansion, but under Commissioner Hall's leadership and their executive director's leadership, they have reoriented the program towards repair. And I think that they've just got a great story to tell about why they did that, but also what are some of the issues that you need to think about when reorienting your program to prepare people for that change. I also want to remind folks, if you have any questions, please type it into the chat box because after Commissioner Hall is done, we're going to answer questions. Commissioner Hall, you're up.
Thank you, Beth. Good afternoon. As she introduced me, my name is Dick Hall, and I'm privileged to serve as chairman of the Mississippi Transportation Commission. Let me begin by telling you a little bit about how we're governed, because it's different than anyone else in any other states. We have a three-person commission. It happen to be 3 men, but three-person commission that is elected by popular vote. And we serve a 4-year term, and we run for election at the same time as the governor and the members of the legislature and other state officials. Just a little bit of background so you kind of know where I'm coming from. The I served in the House and the Senate. I spent 3 4-year terms in the House of Representatives and the State House of Representatives, and I spent 3 4-year terms in the Senate Appropriations. The Senate Committee, the Senate, where I serve as chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And I mention that just I want to make the point. Now, I had a lot of experience of dealing with government money, and where we try to hide it. Got to go to slide 2, if you would. But until I got this job, I didn't realize how tight money could be. The revenue for construction of roads and bridges in Mississippi, our base revenue was last adjusted with a fuel tax increase to 18 cents per gallon in 1987, 32 years ago. Been no adjustment since. Now that was to fund a new 4-lane highway program. That program was very successful, the construction of it. We were judged, when finished, we were judged to have the 6th best highway system in the United States and number 1 in the Mid-South. And interestingly, that to fund that fuel tax increase, was the governor vetoed it. And we overrode the veto by 1 vote, and I tell everybody it was my vote. But we made, as Beth mentioned early, we made a really bad error. We just had no provision at all for maintenance. We were getting ready to spend billions of dollars building this new system of highways, and we didn't put a nickel in there for a plan for maintenance. Now, and that's, well, you know how dumb that is. Now, we also made no provision for inflation. It was a flat 18 cents. And the only thing that's kept, and cars, of course, the vehicles, as we all know, get better mileage today than they did then, so you buy less gasoline. The only thing that's kept us afloat at all is there's a lot more vehicles out there. But what has really hurt us, that we didn't build anything in there for inflation, and I should have thought to make a slide of this, but I'll just tell you quickly. We have one sheet of paper. We have a base year of 1987, and we show the cost of all the materials that go into the construction and maintenance of highways and bridges, and such as asphalt, the opposite one, concrete, structural steel, and so forth. And we have a line for each year since 1987 and what each of those materials cost. The bottom line to that sheet is down at the bottom is the common cost increase of materials is 500%. So we operate with a revenue that was set 32 years ago, base revenue set 32 years ago, and the cost of materials gone up 500%. You can't run a business like that. So about 8 or 9 years ago, we realized that we were going to run out of money, and we weren't not going to be able to continue the construction plans that we had planned. You go to slide 3, please. We began to look for logical stopping points for ongoing projects. First thing we did, we chose to rescind 5 environmental studies for some significant projects. So I'll just give you an example of one. One we had called the Greenville Connector. As you possibly know, there's plans to build Interstate 69 from Canada to Texas. Pieces of it already have been built, a little bit of it through Mississippi, but the main part coming through Mississippi is going to come through the heart of our Mississippi Delta. And we had this plan to build a connector road connecting that highway to that new highway to the new Mississippi River Bridge south of it, so we can get to the great state of Arkansas. Well, that's just an example of the kind of project that we just put on the shelf. We said we can't do that. We can't do other ones like that. We ceased buying right-of-way for future projects unless an acquisition was already underway for earmarks, for either federal or state earmarks. All capacity projects projects for new capacity were just removed from our priority list. In 2013 and 15, we began shifting our program from capacity to preservation. And this was absolutely a unanimous I mean, this was in union with our staff, with all three commissioners. We all agreed on this plan. There was no minority report on this, and we knew there was going to be some very upset people. If you go to slide 4, please. When you go from building new lanes to filling potholes, as Beth, I think, earlier said, you don't have a lot of ribbon cuttings. And when you don't have a lot of ribbon cuttings for the governor and members of the legislature to show up and share the spotlight, there's an awful lot of explaining you have to try to do. And as elected officials, we three commissioners had a particularly difficult time to explain to what was happening, also to the legislature, to the governor, to the general public, and so forth. And we have, through this process, we have done all we can to keep the governor and everybody else informed. But the truth is, the legislature just doesn't want to hear the solution to the problem, which is more money. And some of us, one particularly, have pushed for an increase in the 32-year-old fuel tax for years now. And what really surprises me is the Rotary clubs understand it, but the legislature doesn't. In fact, the legislature has audited us every year since 2012 to looking for missed opportunities for efficiencies. In other words, the point being by some members where the Mississippi Department of Transportation is just not doing a very good job of how to spend their money, and they're wasting it. And they have, in all those audits, they have yet to find anything of significance at all. Now, if you go to slide 5, please. But here's the proof in the pudding. As said earlier, about 2011, you'll see, we began realizing our program of work was going to need some reprioritizing. And we began to seriously do that in 2012 and 2013. Now, as you can imagine, it took a while to do this. It's like that proverbial big ship out in the middle of the sea. It takes a while to make that turn. But you will see that we began bidding system preservation projects in place of capacity projects in 2014 and 2015. And you can see the extreme shift in expenditures beginning in 2016. That green shows a drop in expansion projects, drastic drop. The yellow is repair of pavement, and the blue is labeled other, but it's mostly repair or replacement of bridges. And that's pretty much our story. And that's the program we're going to stay on until some relief shows up. Go to the last slide, if you would, please. Now, these are data from the year 2000 up to 2016. And this clearly shows the serious deterioration of our state highway system. You can see where the green shows are the better highways, and as they deteriorate, they become red, and you can see in 2016 how much more red there is than there was in prior years, and this is going to do nothing but get worse. I've read recently someone said that we're simply managing the demise of our transportation system, and that is exactly what we're doing. And we're doing it the best we can, but there's not many good things you can say about this. It's the only solution is going to be both that. By the way, that federal tax was last passed in 1993, and as I said, the Mississippi tax in 1987, and the only solution is an increase. Now, our legislature has looked at everything you can think of. In fact, last year they passed a lottery. We're one of the few states, I think, now that didn't have a lottery. We passed a lottery. We even enacted sports gaming to put some money into highways. We found out later about the maximum amount that's going to give us is about $3 million a year. They tried everything but facing the one answer we've got short term, and that's the fuel tax. that's pretty much our story. If anybody wants any more detail, we got a website, goam.com, you can go to and hit those, and we certainly will yield to any questions or any suggestions.
Thank you so much. I'm sure everyone agrees that making a shift like this or moving a government agency at all is a big effort, re-steering a ship, and requires a lot of thought, as you can tell, all the way down into what that means for environmental reports. So I really appreciate that presentation and how hard that is. And I do want to point out that what we're asking for is a bit of a sea change in the way this program is administered, and that's no small thing. But we do believe at Tea for America that getting the program more oriented around clear priorities can only improve our chances for better funding for the program and build confidence in the tax base. So I want to remind folks that if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. But I did want to start off and use kind of moderator's privilege and just ask both Jack and Dick, to talk a little bit more about what's the greatest pushback you get when you are focusing your program on repair, and what have you found is the most effective way to explain to people why this is the way it has to be done?
Well, frankly, this is Dick. I haven't found a way to successfully explain it. I've tried everything I know, but like I said earlier, and this is true, I speak to the Rotary clubs, and they seem to understand it. And in fact, I'll almost always ask for a show of hands of those that agree that we need to do the fuel tax or some kind of funding, and almost everyone in the room raises their hand. You explain that to a legislator, and all I hear is, no, I can't vote for that. I can't get reelected. And I'm serious. I mean, privately, that's what they tell me. And interestingly, though, and I've got a thing to show it, back when I was in legislature, and we last did that in 1987, not one single person was defeated. We did it in a re-election year, and not one single person was defeated in re-election because they voted for that fuel tax. Now, that was a long time ago. That was 32 years ago, and we had a different legislature and different politics back then. But I have not been able, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know why that we can't seem to get it across that how serious this is, and how if you can talk about safety and talk about the convenience of helping with congestion and all of that, but this is a basic economic issue. Basic economic issue. If you can't provide transportation, if you can't tell a prospective industry or business how they're going to get their raw material in, their finished product out, they're not going to come talk to you. So, and that's the part I really don't understand why they don't understand.
Commissioner Hall, I have to say that I find that that's the case across the country, where there is a perception that to take a vote in favor of funding for particularly repair, it can get you into trouble, yet we cannot find evidence really any place of people losing their jobs over it. So that becomes particularly complicated to break down when the evidence doesn't back that up, but it is a widely held belief, and I think that's true just across the country. Jack, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
I think what I would add is what we have found to, regardless of what type of project it is, we are really focused on transparency in what the decision-making process is. So hopefully I did our capital investment planning justice, because it is a very transparent process where the projects are selected either through a asset management stream, so our pavement, our bridge project selection process, or through a scoring process for the non-reliability type projects. So I think that's a big part of it. I would hope that would be a big part of it, of establishing, or does establish our credibility, and then also just delivering. We've had some very high-profile projects, and these are reliability projects, the ones I'm thinking of at the moment. But the ability to deliver on a major work that quite frankly could affect a lot of commuters and does affect a lot of commuters. So I think that's the credibility that we're working on.
Fair. All right, Steve, what do we got?
Yeah, there's a good question from Emma Strong for Dick. She wants to know, she lives down on the beautiful Mississippi Gulf Coast, and it seems that road flooding is becoming increasingly problematic, and wants to know if MDOT is working on any climate resiliency projects, and has that emerging issue started to affect how you design and build projects down in that part of the state?
I don't think directly. It's so new, and it's like a lot of other subjects that you deal with nowadays. It's controversial. Is this real climate change, and is this going to be something of the future? But I think there's no doubt that in fact, this year we're having a particularly bad year. All over in different areas of the state, and the Gulf Coast being one of them, which got heavy rain last week and extremely hard. But we are looking at when we build models, we're looking at hydraulics when we design. So yes, it's being discussed, but we're not setting anything any hard policy yet about it.
I also would add, this is an issue that we're hearing coming up more and more across the country, and it's an issue that's rather complicated because it's not like a lot of other areas where you set a threshold and you just have to build to above some sort of threshold. There's more of a decision tree type style decision making that has to happen based on the type of disaster, and you got to have considerations about whether or not it's something you can elevate above, or you're designing it to be able to tolerate some flooding or maybe fail in one area so it can come back quickly. And it's become very, very complicated to figure out. And what I hear a lot from the design engineers is they could use a lot more guidance from experts on, an if-then approach for each of these roads. Because right now they're almost put in a position of, okay, there's flood water, so build higher. You could take that to the point where you're building highways in the sky, and that's not what we mean. We need something more sophisticated than that, and this is an area where, frankly, federal highways research could be very helpful to state DOTs to understand what their choices are and which is appropriate in which context.
All right, here's a good question from Tim Gould, and this may be best here for Beth, but would a requirement to include long-term maintenance funding in the financing package of new capacity projects help to reduce the number, or just reduce the number of new highway projects to advance in a DOT plan? And just a reminder, one of our recommendations is talking about creating a plan for new capacity projects to prove that they have the money to care for long-term maintenance or have it be part of the overall package. So
yes, Tim,
what would that do to the number of highway projects, and what's the connection?
Yeah, Tim, it's a really good question, and it might serve to reduce the number of new highways that we're building. It would be a very interesting conversation to ask folks to serve up a maintenance and repair plan, a long-term plan, along with any new capacity. It is something we do on the transit side. Now, I'm not going to say we get it perfectly right on the transit side. We don't. We've got a backlog there, too, so we're not doing enough. But we do a heck of a lot more on the transit side than on the highway side. And it would be nice to bring some of that good governance into the highway program to establish a better program of basic asset management. When I was at the U.S. Department of Transportation, I was on the credit council that would oversee applications for TIFIA loans and RIF loans. And one of the things that we found regularly, we had a handful of states that came in with big requests for loans for big new highways. One that I'm thinking of in particular that was going to be built in an area that doesn't really have much development yet, with the goal of filling it up with traffic. They were going to pay it back through regular appropriations, so it wasn't a toll or anything like that because there wasn't going to be enough use for a long time to bring in money through a toll. And while they were doing that, they were admitting that some rural roads were going to have to go to gravel because they couldn't afford to maintain them. And according to the law, we had no choice but to say, sure, go into debt to build something new that you have no plan to maintain while you admit you're not going to maintain the rest of your system. And that just didn't strike me as good policy. And that's really stuck with me. I would like to see those programs require some sense of a plan to pay for what's being built rather than what we knew was happening. And when we asked those agencies behind closed doors what their plan was, the plan was to come back to the feds in the future for more money. And that's gotten us exactly where we are.
May I jump in there for a minute?
Yeah.
Perhaps somebody from Arkansas is listening to this, so they can tell it if I'm telling something wrong. But a perfect example of that kind of thing is some years ago, Arkansas passed legislation to set aside a half a percent sales tax to go into funding new highways, new capacity. And they put a repeater in it, if I remember correctly. It would be there for 10 years. So in the very front end there, they were saying, we're going to build all these new highways, and when we get them paid for, we're going to take the tax off, which is basically what we did back in 1987. Now, fortunately, the people from Arkansas got smarter than we have been in Mississippi, and I think this year during their session of the legislature, I believe they removed that repeater and made that tax permanent. But that just shows you, though, the way that we historically have done this. We've gone out there, we sell to the public, well, let's go build all these new highways, we'll fund them, but we made no provision for maintain them once we got them built.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Hall makes a really good point. We in the public are partially responsible for this because we are also motivated and excited by the brand new thing more than the drudgery of maintenance. We all understand that this is natural for us to want to do something new. But we've got to create a program, a backstop that makes it easier to do the day-to-day drudgery, to floss our teeth and to take care of ourselves. And that's what we're talking about, is orienting the program so when we're tempted to do something that is unwise over the long term, we have some pressure to stay true to what we know is responsible. And so that's what our proposals are meant to support. There's certainly other proposals that we'd love to hear back from you. There's some interesting things we could do with TIFIA and with public bonds that put them more, makes them more available for asset management than new. Right now, we have a program that was developed around building out a new highway system back in the 50s, and we inherit that culture. So making the shift is going to require us to go through program piece by piece and do real work, just like our two speakers today from Massachusetts and Mississippi have done. So at this point, we are out of time, but I want to thank our speakers yet again for joining and telling their stories, which I think are really instructive and helpful for the nation to figure out the direction we should be going in. We'd love to hear any other ideas that folks who have participated have or questions you have. Feel free to email us. And I want to thank Steve Ellis again for the Partnership of Taxpayers for Common Sense in developing and promoting this report all the way back to the beginning in 2011. And recommend that everyone share the report far and wide. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for including us.